Now I have some questions, and later I hope the audience have some additional questions. I want to start with the first question, and especially this is for all, but I will make a variant of the questions for Paula. How do you think that shared spectrum can help to reduce the digital divide and allow to connect the unconnected? And the specific question for Paula is regarding the Colombia project, the Buenos Aires project, because I know that project, and one of the things is that they were using IMT band that nobody is using, but they cannot use because of the regulation. So how do you think that we can manage or deal with the regulation? So.
Thank you. So we have been working closely with community networks and regulatory bodies in Latin America, and I don't work specifically with the Colmodo case, but I have a good example of the work that we do here in Brazil, and this is with Anatel. And I think that Vinicius is coming back, but one thing that we have just launched this year is the working group for community networks with based within Anatel. So this is, I think, a good example of how we can close the digital divide, working alongside regulators and understanding, so they can understand directly from community members what their challenges are and how to overcome them. So what I would say is that we'll be working also closely with Conodo and CITEL mostly, and the local regulator as much as we can to support that technically.
Oh, thank you. I was going to invite them to bring us another microphone so that we don't have to shuffle as much. We can share microphones pretty well, yeah. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I think shared spectrum access is a great way of helping bridge the digital divide. You know, as it was mentioned earlier, not all service providers have the financial wherewithal to acquire spectrum rights in an auction, whether that's for a nationwide license or even a large regional license. And having unlicensed access, or in the case of CBRS, licensed by rule access, that really helps in reducing costs and enabling service providers, especially WISPs, fixed wireless access service providers, to get access to critical spectrum that they need to make that last few miles of connectivity. We may be bringing fiber into particular communities, and then the last mile or even up to miles, I believe we're seeing in CBRS are provided over this licensed by rule GAA access. I think you're going to see WISPs continuing to use shared license access in CBRS, and then as we're looking at 6E, I think standard power and outdoor deployments will also be very important to increase connectivity for rural areas and hard to reach areas.
Jamie.
Yeah, I think I would just add in addition to that, and I know I talked a little bit about it, but in terms of, other options to close the digital divide, and I think Martha said it really well when she set up this panel, it's like, it's really going to take a mix of different technologies. Like often in the policy world, we hear like this technology is the best or this technology is the best, but ultimately customers and consumers, they just want to be connected wherever they are to do whatever they want to do in the most affordable way possible. And I think that's going to require a mix of different technologies. From our perspective, some of which Jennifer just talked about, and then from our perspective too, when it comes to the low Earth orbit, that's a different way of sharing spectrum. Satellite providers are given the license, and then there's sharing that must occur with all the satellites being launched. But we think this technology in particular holds a lot of promise for connecting truly unserved and underserved areas. And sure, it may be that fiber would be wonderful if we could put fiber every single place, but honestly, that's not realistic with the resources and topography and terrain that we have. So we need to be looking at a mix of technologies to really solve this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a must to share spectrum because we need to lower the barriers as much as we can for more actors to bring the service to this. At least the parts that we are working with are the parts where the market won't get there. So every penny we can save, we need to save it for the operational cost of the network that we are deploying, not to buy spectrum in a place where nobody's using any spectrum at all usually because it's a far, far away land. So absolutely. Actually, the problems that we're having in some places that are not, they are lacking good service, but not the most extreme cases. The problem that we're having is, and it's something that maybe we'll speak later, but we need a way to start using it even more efficiently. Sometimes the problem is that we want to use shared spectrum, but everybody sets up the device in the way that they want or as fast as they can, and they don't use it in an intelligent fashion so that everybody can use the spectrum in a more wise manner.
Thank you. And Marcelo, you talk about the Chile experience, but I am wondering how can we identify connectivity requirements in rural remote areas? Because in Chile, it took at least 3 years to identify some, but in general, we are saying that between 3 million and 4 million people are unconnected or underconnected, but how do you really identify those needs?
So to me, all the governments in the world, they have different levels. You have central, regional, local. To me, of all the authorities that I know, usually mayors are the guys that know best. They know best every corner of the land that they are in charge of. So at least to us, what we have been doing the last years, because many people tell me, hey, you're losing your time. You cannot be calling 345 mayors. Are you crazy? I mean, because it's a lot of time spent. But for us, having the information from the guy that actually talks to the people that live there is the most important thing, because so far, every time we use information from the local government, we have never had a false positive, On the other hand, when I use information from the central government, sometimes 1,000 kilometers from it, we were giving in Santiago the information, and then we went 1,000 kilometers south, and what the government thinks that's going on is actually, when you go there on site, it's not like that. So although it takes some time, I always recommend get the information from the closest authority that you can get from that part. Usually, it's much better than the one that you can get from the central organisms of the country.
And Paula, what is the ISOC?
Yeah, when I was this week listening, and I'm quoting Vinicius again, but I was in an event last week, and he mentioned having a national connectivity plan. And I think when we talk about a country as wide as Brazil, we need to consider that we have more than 5,000 mayors. So I think that maybe we need to start working on a subnational level to get this type of data, and working with municipalities as much as we can, but maybe having them a regional perspective or even state perspective in terms of actually reaching this data and talking with local counterparts that may have this information on the ground. So.
And what is the idea of Amazon to spread your project and reach the?
Yeah, we would like to, obviously serve as many customers as possible. I think there's a lot of invention happening, particularly with Project Kuiper. Everything is being invented in-house to try to serve as many people as possible with each satellite. I think in terms of, figuring out who needs it, we know, I think that half the world essentially lacks access to at least good connectivity. So, we're really excited to hopefully bring another option or maybe the only option for some areas, but certainly bring, additional options for people that may not have a lot of choices.
Jennifer, how is the US experience with the CBRS?
Well, CBRS is very interesting in terms of the types of deployments that are occurring. I mentioned earlier the WISPs that are taking advantage of access to the CBRS GAA band, in particular the license by rule portion. And for them, this is the first time that they've had access to what we like to call carrier grade spectrum and carrier grade equipment. And they're, in the process of upgrading old outdated networks and technology to the latest 4G and or 5G deployments. So they're very happy in terms of their ability to reach their existing customers and expand operations, again, without having to acquire a spectrum license. But what's also interesting is that a lot of municipalities are also taking advantage of access to the CBRS spectrum. We're seeing municipalities, school systems, and other community organizations offering broadband services using GA CBRS spectrum. For example, the Sacramento School District in California is setting up broadband networks and supplying broadband connectivity to students in their homes near the school. So that those students can continue to do homework and or connect, especially during the COVID lockdown. That was a very important component of continuing their education. So there are lots of different ways that we're seeing new organizations being able to access spectrum on a shared basis for the first time and really increase connectivity for their communities.
Thank you, Jennifer. Talking about this private use of carrier grade spectrum, currently we are talking about Industry 4.0 and Agriculture 4.0 and anything 4.0. How do you think that this private use of spectrum will help to develop the growing of this XX 4.0?
I'll go again just because I have the microphone and it might be easier. Yeah, so that's the other part of the CBRS experience that we're seeing that's amazing. So not only are the communities deploying their own networks and helping to serve the unconnected, but enterprises who have been frustrated sometimes with getting mobile network operators to respond to them in a timely manner or to bring the kind of connectivity they need to their factories or to their campuses are now able to deploy their own private wireless networks, again, without needing a license. And we're seeing a ton of industrial 4.0 deployments. My favorite, and I mentioned this at lunch, happens to be the U.S. Marine Corps, which has a enormous logistics base in Albany, Georgia. And they are deploying a 5G network using CBRS and millimeter wave spectrum to enable automation and robotics and AR/VR applications across this very large campus, really improving the productivity of the logistics space and modernizing it in a way that I think is going to be an example for lots of other military bases and institutions. And ultimately, you'll see a lot of these same logistics capabilities being deployed by the private sector as well. So really a great opportunity for the industrial 4G revolution through through access to spectrum on a shared basis.
Okay.
Yes. So as I mentioned, AWS, Amazon Web Services, is also partnering with Federated and others to offer private 5G networks. I think the idea is that just to help customers basically deploy and scale this network really with just a few clicks. I think, AWS saw an opportunity here to make this simple and easy, and essentially they'll manage everything, or they can partner with folks that have certain components and work with them. But the idea is to make this as easy as possible, and whether it be, again, a manufacturing facility or, construction site. I think we're seeing a couple different use cases now. One is extending coverage outdoors. So you think of like an airport tarmac or a construction site or, warehouses and things like that. That's one of the things we're seeing. And the other is like seasonal networks or networks that might need to move around. So think like maybe like a conference like this. You want it in one location now, but then you want to take it to the next location and have like your badge readers and things like that. So we see a lot of promise for this, and I think really when it comes to the CBRS band in general, and that idea of dynamically shared spectrum and allowing all these different use cases and users, I think we're really just at the beginning of what's possible with that band.
Paula, any comments?
Yeah, on a smaller scale, I wanted to bring up also an example of a community network that was deployed here in Latin America in a project called Nanum. And it's in Bolivia and Paraguay. And this has enabled the community to commercialize their products. So when we talk about closing the digital divide, it's also about inclusion and making it possible for, in a smaller scale, the community to access the internet and make commercial use of products that have been sold not digitally before. So this is my contribution.
Well, 5 years ago, we had the doubt what would happen if we allowed in the country private LTE networks to be deployed. And they did a change in the law that allowed somehow narrow 5 megahertz LTE bands to be deployed. And after 5 years, I have to tell you, I'm usually on the road, so I visit many networks on site, and I can tell you that I've seen those deployments mostly in the industrial, a lot in the mining sector in the north, but I haven't seen it in band 40 where we are allowed to do private deployments. And I thought because of the band, I thought I would see it in the south, but mainly I only seen it in industrial applications. I haven't seen it in community projects or more social-oriented projects. So I'm not really sure what to project from the experience that we have. It's an option, but so far we have most of the time when we need to focus on communities rather than industrial problems, we approach lower projects that have to do with fixed access, lower the cost as much as possible. We're always aiming to save pennies. That's what we do.
Thank you. Now it's time to hear the public. I like to hear some question or opinions. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. I am Maria Myers Hamilton from Jamaica, the spectrum regulator. And my question is to Marcelo. I'm very intrigued with the whole concept of the ISPs running the cable overhead. We have a challenge in Jamaica with leaking cables and interference and them not maintaining the cables in a timely manner. So they actually interfere with other customers. What are the measures you have put in place? That's one question I have for you to kind of mitigate those challenges. And two, your observation is spot on with 5G. We recently have seen requests coming in for industry using 5G, where persons are not going into that field like the wharf. So you find that our wharfs are now looking at 5G to automate it because there is a lack of individuals, to come into those low-paying jobs. I think it will take a little time for the ecosystem to develop in a small island state like ourselves, and the cost is important with the handset and devices. So thank you.
Well, one of the things, again, sadly, the report is only in Spanish. It's 200 pages long, so if you don't speak Spanish, at least see the last chapter. There's a chapter that has to do, it's like 30 pages of only pictures. It's like a book for little kids, only pictures. And that has to do because although we were doing something, the main scope of that work was to know where there was fiber so that we could plan where to put fiber. We found out that there was a lot of cables that were being deployed. Then they stopped using them and they were left there. So that made a mess. So one of the main recommendations that we had in that project, there's not only one problem that you have with infrastructure that's not taken care of. We found many, of course, we find all the cases that you can imagine. We find some cables that the regulator had no idea that were there, yes. We also found some places where supposedly there should be a cable because they asked for the permit to put them there, but there was nothing. We also find cables that were deployed but were cut in some part and nobody cared. Some other cables were not cut, but they were on the floor because the poles that we're using were not maintained. Some other equipment, because they never had maintenance, they were full of vegetation, so they were rusting, etc. So what we recommended the regulator was to start doing some system that made it mandatory for at least a little of maintenance. However, this translated, not because of our work, but the regulator understood this, and we have a law that tells that if there's a cable, for example, we have a lot of copper old cable for DSL that's not being used anymore. So if I, as a private company, put the cable there and then I left it there to rot, the city hall can take it away and then they charge me because I left it there, you see? So there's a law now about that. And I'm not sure I understand well the second part of the question, but one of the things that at least this is the way we see it, if we want to have internet in every single place where people live, we cannot think of having the guys that maintain and install that infrastructure from the cities. We need to start having people in the small towns. We are working in many different projects to make that happen. For example, we launched a book that has everything that we need to work fiber, and we did very good with sponsors. We gave that book to all the public libraries, to all the universities, to all the technical schools, so that at least when you're a little kid, you now have a book that has everything. It's in Spanish again, I'm sorry, but maybe we will translate it to English because we have been doing very well with that book. It's a book that's like, sorry for the word, but it's like the Bible of fiber. It has like everything on it. And we're also trying to do some we have an office that has to do with capacity, with teaching people how to do not things that you study in the university that are, with a lot of background and a lot of books. No, just stuff that you do on a regular basis. Yeah. That's what needs to be done. We need more people. We need an army of guys that can live outside of the cities so that we can maintain and give life to these networks that we need to approach the people that live in these unconnected communities.
Thank you very much. It was a really good panel and presentation. And when I saw the map of Chile and the fiber outlay, it got me thinking a little bit about Vietnam. And you have these countries that are fairly long and skinny, and it's relatively simple. Well, I don't want to say anything simple, but it's a lot easier to provide coverage by providing a fiber strand, down the length of a country than, providing fiber in a country as large as, say Brazil. So obviously we're going to need an all of the above approach, maybe using satellite coverage, using 5G, it's sort of the whole toolkit. But what really struck me is having Jennifer on this panel and then thinking about fiber. And one of the most fantastically expensive things to do is last couple of kilometer coverage. So you've run your corridor, you got your rights of way, and you've buried that fiber. Well, with AFC and 6 gigahertz in the US, we're trialing with 160 megahertz channel. You're able to get a gigabit per second on the downlink and 500 megabits per second on the uplink. And this is, still sort of trial stage, so that, could become more advanced. But in a country like Chile, that would be probably a wonderful solution. And, in Brazil and other places where you're able to expand on your current fiber network and then provide point to multi-point or point to point. So I guess, my question is then for Jennifer, how reasonable do you think something like that could be deployed, where, federated wireless AFC could be made available to provision this sort of point-to-point or point-to-multi-point access. And, any country in Latin America where you could, perhaps do last, maybe 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers to connect local communities. Thanks.
No, I agree with you completely, Chris. This is a great opportunity for wireless internet service providers in countries throughout Latin America to take advantage of the 6 gigahertz band and what it has to offer, not only in terms of wider channels, but farther reach. We are absolutely ready to assist, the local internet service providers, the equipment manufacturers, and the regulators to get the AFC up and running so they can take advantage. And I think it's even more important that the full 1200 megahertz of 6 gigahertz is available so that we can maximize that reach, maximize the throughput, and take advantage of the capabilities that Wi-Fi 6E and ultimately 7 is going to bring to the table. You have a follow-up, I can see.
So I thought that was really good, but could you explain for folks why you need all 1200 megahertz? Maybe not everybody's seen Federated Wireless's AFC and, might not understand this principle of channel diversity. I mean, why does it matter? Okay. If I've got 500 megahertz, why isn't that sufficient? I think it might be interesting for this audience to understand why it's so important.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
I think Ira mentioned it in his presentation earlier. You're going to have limitations on the channels that are available to you, whether that's because of incumbents or because of just how many wideband channels you're going to be able to do in 500 megahertz. So especially in dense urban environments, I think that's where it's especially going to be important to have the full 1200 megahertz. As was mentioned earlier, these bands fill up. They start to fill up, and you're going to want to make sure that you have the ability to take advantage of that here.
Let me tell you an example. We have a very nice project in the Araucanía region in Chile. We're trying to connect 278 communities in one network. We're talking of 65,000 households in these communities. And the problem that we're having is that the shared spectrum that we have is so little. That's extremely hard because, okay, when I'm in the countryside, real countryside, no problem. No problem. Nobody's using the spectrum. Have no noise, everything is fantastic. But sometimes I have to cross some medium-sized cities, and then hell comes loose. It's extremely hard. You have to do all kinds of, So we need more spectrum, more shared spectrum. That's when you are there deploying the projects, you realize that's a real need. It's a real need.
We have here a BRINT and some regulators. And in Colombia, we have at least registered in the ICT ministry like 3,500 ISPs, small ISPs that serves from 100 to 2,000 or something users. I want to hear from the regulators how is the perspective for these small ISPs, because I am not sure, but I think that the situation in Latin America and perhaps in other countries is quite similar that here in Brazil, that most of the internet access is really provided by these small ISPs using shared spectrum and unlicensed spectrum. So I don't know who want to share some thoughts.
Thank you for a question, very important question. For Brazil, we reduce almost every tributes or low fees for this small operator for ISP. So, and we stimulate the SPA start to use spectrum, any kind of spectrum. We have more 3,000 municipalities that the ISP can ask for secondary basis spectrum. The fee almost free. We promote the 3738 gigahertz for 5G for SLP, called private networks. It's a possible for model. So we try to stimulate the small SP come together. I think the fight must be, the union get the strength against the medium and big companies and MNOs. So we try to encourage this small company, the ESP, to provide fiber. I think probably they are finished, they plan to use fiber. In Brazil, we have a huge, they said before, more than 50% of internet with fixed connected fiber provided from small ISPs. And now stimulate them to use networks, maybe FWA models or adopt a part of spectrum using secondary bases, for example, or private. But after I want to complement with a question for you too. We discuss about, for example, we decide to promote this huge part of spectrum for Wi-Fi 6E. Do we have any social plans for the society, for poor community, or what is the plan for meaningful connectivity that Wi-Fi 6 can help Brazil?
Okay, thank you. I think that we can talk a bit about the current Small ISPs Association in the US, WISPA, I think is. Some comments?
I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of WISPA, but I think they're very supportive of having access to the full 1200 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band, and are looking forward to utilizing Wi-Fi in addition to other bands to support their customers. They'll take what they can get where they can get it. And I think you're going to see 5G deployments in CBRS be very complementary with Wi-Fi deployments as well. So it's not an either or here. I think you're going to see both technologies and different access options continuing to proliferate, and that WISPs, particularly in rural and smaller communities, are going to take advantage of what works best for their network, what works best for their community, and it may again be a combination of 4G, 5G, and Wi-Fi technologies all together.
Okay, I think it's Samba time. Okay, last.
No, I just thought that was a really, really good point that Jennifer made. If you think about the fixed point-to-point market, what's being used right now for the backhaul, all of that is non-standardized. It's all proprietary. So it's super expensive. Good equipment, not knocking it, but the moment you bring in WISPs, the reason the WISPs in the United States are so excited, whether you're doing it on 5G NRU or using Wi-Fi, it becomes standardized. So it's almost like Open RAN, right? When you have standardized interface, when you have a standardized way to bring this equipment to market, with scale, you're going to drive costs way, way, way down. And so as you see these 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi radios deployed, you're going to be talking about a fraction of the cost for this last 5-kilometer access. So it'll be a big deal.
Thank you. Last intervention from Marcelo, and then the Samba dancers are just outside, so.
Real quick, I just want to point out that although everybody's talking about 6 gigahertz, and soon we'll be talking about 10 gigahertz, I think we should also be talking about the lower bands. We should definitely, I mean, one of the things that I really think we should have from 512 to 600 megahertz, we should be all able to transmit data. At least in the country that I live of, I can only use that spectrum for TV, for digital broadcasting TV. And to me, it's lost spectrum. I mean, it's too expensive to have a TV broadcasting system in UHF in these rural places. So however, that spectrum, let me tell you, the first person we connected with an experimental permit in TV white spaces in an indigenous tribe in Araucanía region, we had to cross 3 forests to reach that house. And then you think, oh no, but you know what? These people that live in faraway places, they really don't need that much internet. That household is consuming 1 terabyte monthly. It's the same as an expensive house with fiber in Santiago. So we need more spectrum, but not only aiming up, aiming low too. And that's something that sadly I don't see in the industry. Everybody's aiming at the higher bands because they know there's more bandwidth. But we should also think of the coverage, and that's why we should aim down also.
Okay, thank you, Marcelo, and thank you to our panelists. And with this, I close the session and give the floor to Marta.